In this tutorial, I'll show you how to paint a gorgeous galaxy with tons of texture, color variation, and value changes. So let's start. Make sure you're using a big enough brush, like this is a size 10 around, and start picking up colors that you like and filling the page in with them. Notice how I let them blend together, and I even drop more water in to make blooms and help with the blending. My movements are super loose and random. But if you have trouble with this, try thinking of painting fluffy clouds and move your brush accordingly. We're playing with wet and wet right now, so you can always just use water or less paint and go back in and add different or darker colors anywhere in the painting that's still wet. You can also add a splatter to make more color variations. Since it's still wet, the dots won't stay, but it will make the piece more interesting. Also, be sure to add black in some parts of the piece. If you want a huge contrast, I recommend you use black ink. Ink is completely fine to use with watercolor and can make some gorgeous textures, but I'm just using black watercolors here. I continue filling the page in with the same random brush strokes in different colors, and in this corner I make it fully black for more contrast. Also notice how diagonally from the top right corner to the bottom left, I have left that area much lighter by using less color and more water. This is how you play with the contrast and make cool effects that look like nebulas. But if you're planning to do lettering in white on top, it's better to make the whole piece darker, so you don't have to leave this white area. While my first layer is still wet, I add more black in different parts of the composition. Since it's a little drier, the paint spreads less, which is good because I don't want the black to overpower the colors. I also add more colors trying to balance the piece and more splatter. I'm keeping an eye on the overall composition and balancing it, but I have to work quickly and do all these changes while the first layer is still wet. Now I use a paper towel to lighten some areas by gently dabbing it, especially in the diagonal nebula. This also creates a beautiful misty texture. I continue adding color, water, and using the paper towel until I'm happy with it, and then I let it dry. You can see how there are a lot of blooms forming and beautiful textures. But once it's more dry, I add even more water to make more blooms. And then I use rubbing alcohol in a dropper to add texture. You can also add salt instead, or use cling wrap or any other fun technique. I covered this and other basic techniques in my Anyone Can Watercolor class, and I left a free link below if you want to take it. Notice how random my placements of the alcohol drops are, and I varied the sizes of the drops by placing more or less alcohol down on the page. For the smallest dots, I just touch the page with the tip of the dropper. Once I feel like it's done, I use a hairdryer to speed up the drying process, and then I use splatter to add more of a texture. Since the previous layer is mostly dry, the dots will stay where they are this time. I dry the dots and now we can add the second layer. But before we do it, I want you to notice all the fun textures that were made with just one layer. Because we use so much water, the paint dried in such a magical way. This is the beauty of watercolors, and can only be achieved if you let go and let it do its own thing. Adding a second layer is really important to up the contrast, make more textures, and more intense colors through glazing. Also, the alcohol drops are way too light on their own, so if you use this technique, it's definitely necessary to do a second layer. For the second layer, I do a similar thing as the first one, but this time I don't cover everything and I keep my edges loose and fluffy. You can make random shapes anywhere in the piece this time since you already have the first layer down. It'll just make a beautiful texture. I think this piece could have used more pink and black, so those are the colors I put down the most. And I don't paint inside the diagonal nebula because I want it to stay light, and I'm just increasing its contrast with the background. If you overdo an area, just dab it with a paper towel. Once I feel like it's done, I use a hairdryer to dry it, and now we can add stars. So actually, my camera stopped filming because it was full at this point and I didn't even notice until the piece was done. I hate when that happens, but don't worry, I'll still explain the process. So I used white ink for the initial tiny stars. All you need to do is get an old toothbrush and dip it in white ink, or you can use white gouache or acrylic and then flick the bristles. If you flick them slowly, they make a very tiny stars. And if you flick them faster, it makes more concentrated stars with more size variation. So you can easily control the effect with varying the pressure you flick the bristles at. You can also just splatter with a normal brush, but the stars will be too big. The tiny ones feel more real. If you look at a reference, that's how stars look like. Here you can see the results from this technique, and it already feels like a galaxy. You could just stop here, but I'm going to add bigger stars for more details. There are a lot of ways to do this, like splatter with a brush or just painting them in with some white medium. but I really like using the Uniball Signo broad point white gel pen for this. It's very opaque and easy to add details and make bigger or smaller dots. And you can even draw in diamond stars or just use crossing lines. Other ideas are lettering or constellations or a silhouette of something in white ink. You can get really creative with the galaxy effect. But that's the gist of it. Our painting is done, and I hope this mini lesson helped you, and if you make a galaxy of your own, I'd love to see it, so just tag me on Instagram. If you enjoyed this tutorial, do me a favor and leave a comment or a like. This will help other people to find it. And if you want to get notified every time I post a new one, just subscribe. And I'll leave you with something to think about. There is nobody else in this entire universe that is like you, nor will there ever be. You are one of a kind and deserve all the best. Think about that. You are one of a kind. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.